We are in Daf Aleph, Amud Aleph. Welcome, Bensi and Davis. It's good to see you, Bensi. So we learned the halachas that you're not allowed to do hatmana, insulate something before Shabbos in a davar hamosif hevel, and something that increases the heat, so something that conducts the heat or something that's going to make it hotter. And the concern is that it won't be fully cooked, and then you're going to increase the temperature. You're going to, because it has something that conducts its own heat, so therefore you may actually heat that insulation itself. But you could insulate in something that's a davar she'eino mosif hevel. You can insulate in something that doesn't add heat, so just insulates, but doesn't itself conduct the heat. That's before Shabbos. But if you did not do that, like you did not cover it before Shabbos. On Shabbos, even in something that does not conduct its own heat and doesn't add heat and doesn't have its own heat source, you're not allowed to cover it on Shabbos. As Rashi points out here, the Gemara said earlier, the reason is because if you do so, maybe the food is not going to be hot enough in order to be insulated. And when you're ready to insulate on Shabbos, you can say, "Hey, let me heat it up a little bit more," and that will add to the heat. So I'm looking at my pot. I'm ready to insulate it. And so the chicken soup is not hot enough. Let me just put it back on the stove for another few minutes so the temperature rises, so that when I heat it, it'll remain nice and hot. Another halacha, kisovin is gala mutala chasesi. If on Shabbos, after I insulated and covered it all around, part of it opened up, it uncovered, I'm allowed to recover it. And Tues says this is true also, not only if it happened to uncover, but even if I intentionally uncovered it. But if I intentionally uncovered it before Shabbos, and then I want to cover it on Shabbos, I can't do it, and that's why the Gemara said in this way. The next halacha, a person is allowed to fill a jug of cold water and insulate it beneath a blanket or a pillow in order for the hot temperature, the sun, not to warm the water. You want it to remain cold. That is allowed to be insulated in a to keep it cold. And I don't say, well, if I'm not allowed to insulate something hot because I may heat it up, so I can't insulate something cold because maybe I'm going to come to insulate something hot and then I'm going to heat it up. That we don't say, and therefore you're allowed to you're allowed to insulate and protect the cold jug in order to retain its cold water. So Gemara explains, you're allowed to do hatmana, you're allowed to insulate something that's cold. Tanina, what's he teaching us? That's what we learned. A person can fill a jug and put it beneath a pillow or blanket. So you see that the cold jug is also permissible. It's teaching us something important. Perhaps that's only something that you don't usually warm up. So I'm allowed to insulate it in order to keep it cold because it's something that I'm not going to keep warm. It's not something that I would ever warm up. But something that I'm allowed to warm up, something that I would usually warm up, perhaps I'm not allowed to insulate it because maybe I'm going to come to warm this. So, for instance, our Mishnah is talking about water. I want the water to remain cold, and I'm not typically going to heat that water. So it makes sense that I'm allowed to insulate it because I'm not going to heat that up. But how about food that I usually would eat cold, hot? So I have a soup. And usually I would warm it. I want it to be chilled, and so I want to insulate it to remain cold. But because I want it to stay fresh or whatever the reason is. But I would usually heat that. And since I would usually heat that, maybe I'm not allowed to insulate it to retain its cold because maybe I'm going to insulate it to retain its heat. or heat it up. But maybe something that I usually heat up and then insulate it to keep its heat. Maybe I'm not allowed to do that. Kamash Milan. That's what he says. No, that this is permissible. Amar Avuna. So Avuna said, in the name of Rebbe or Rav, he says you're not allowed to insulate cold things. Tanya. But what about the brisa we learned? Rebbe did permit to do hatmana on cold. It depends. Before he heard this from Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, he indeed said it was prohibited. But once he heard the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who said in the name of his father that it was permissible, he accepted that, and he started teaching that it is permissible to insulate something cold. Rebbe was sitting Omar, and he said, Rebbe was teaching, and he said, you're not allowed to insulate something cold because you may come to heat it. And since you're not allowed to insulate it on Shabbos in its hot state, you're not allowed to insulate it in its cold state. Amar l'fanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, said to Rebbe, Abba hitir lahat min hasatzayim. But my father did permit to insulate cold. Amar kvar harazakin. So this is the elder had already permitted it, and so Rebbe accepted it. The Gemara says that Amar Papa said, see how greatly they honored each other. She'ilu Rabbi Yossi Kayim, because if Rabbi Yossi was alive, he would be there as a student in front of Rebbe, just like Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, was in front of Rebbe as a student, because Rebbe was a nasi, Rebbe was the prince, and yet. Dahar Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi, and how do we know that Rabbi Yossi would be sitting there? Because of Rabbi Shmuel, who filled the shoes of his father. He was a great scholar. He was on the level of his father, and nevertheless, because he too, even though he was a great scholar, sat in front of Rebbe. Why? Because Rebbe was the nasi, and he sat in front of him. And yet Rebbe accepted the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, that this is what his father Rabbi Yossi had said, and accepted it as a halacha. And not only that, Tues points out that Rabbi Shmuel was Rabbi Yossi was a teacher of Rebbe, and nevertheless Rebbe became the head of the academy, and Rebbe became the nasi. And Rebbe was greater in a sense than Rabbi Yossi, and nevertheless accepted the psak. The humility of Rebbe. Amalei Rav Nachman l'Dora Avdei. Rav Nachman had said to his servant Daru, Atman litzainin. Go ahead and insulate cold water for me. So he allowed him to insulate cold water on Shabbos, like this teaching of Rebbe, who accepted from Rabbi Yossi. And go ahead and bring me some of the hot water that the non-Jewish chef had cooked before Shabbos. Shama Rebbe Ami, so Rebbe Ami heard about this, and he was upset. And he was upset on account of that. It was cooked by a non-Jew, and as we know, food cooked by a non-Jew is not kosher. So Amar Rav Yosef, my time ekbid. So Rav Yosef said, why? Why are you so upset about it? Why is Rav Ami so upset about it? Both of these teachings are like his teachers. He's accepting the halacha that he received in the Masorah of his teachers. Chadek Rav, Chadek Shmuel. One is like Rav, and one is like Shmuel. Like Shmuel said earlier, which we said in the name of Rav and Rabbi Yossi, that you're allowed to insulate something that's cold. So I have something that's cold. I have a cold water, like in our Mishnah, or a cold soup or something else. I'm allowed to insulate it so it remain fresh and not be warmed by the sun. And Karav, and like the teaching of Rav, Damar Rav Shmuel, but Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Kol Shu Necha Kamo Shu Chai, Ema Mishru Le'Nachrim, that anything that is edible raw, meaning anything that you don't need to cook, and water is definitely included in that. There is no prohibition of bishul akum. There's the cooking of a non-Jew is not gonna prohibit it. So why was he upset that he was drinking this water? The Gemara says, that there's a obligation for an Adam Chashuv, for a leader, a Talmud Chacham like that, to be strict, even in things that are not prohibited, so that other people not be more lenient. And there's a list of, on the side of the Gemara in the Maseres HaShas, a list of places where the Gemara says Adam Chashuv Shani, that even though something is permissible, there are requirements of an Adam Chashuv to be stricter in certain areas. And Rabbi Ami held that it would have been appropriate for Rav Nachman to be strict about not even having water cooked by a non-Jew.
I have a question about that. How does this work with something like coffee, which is commonly drank either hot or cold?
How to insulate it on Shabbos, you're talking about?
Yeah. So let's say you have...
By insulating or by having a non-Jew cook it?
By insulating. So if you've got cold coffee that, it's, you said something you would normally heat up or would not normally heat up. Is that specific to the individual, or is that something as what's commonly done?
Either one is going to be permitted to insulate when cold. That's what this Gemara is saying. It's not subjective or objective. Regardless of whether subjectively you usually heat it or objectively most people usually heat it, nevertheless, since right now it's cold, you're allowed to insulate it. And essentially the idea is that it's going to be a double gzera. Right now it's cold. And I'm saying you can't insulate it. The Chacham is saying you can't insulate it on account of maybe when they're hot, you're going to insulate it. And hot insulating is also not a problem in and of itself. It's only a problem that maybe you're going to heat it up in order for it to be really hot so that the insulation works and retains the heat for longer. So that would be a gzera almost. And so therefore, Rabbi Yossi said, and the halacha is that regardless whether you usually would heat this up or subjectively most people would usually heat this up, since it's currently cold and you're only insulating it to retain its freshness and cold and remain cold in the sun or in hot temperatures, that is permissible. Essentially, putting something in the fridge is permissible. Okay. You can't. That's taking something cold and retaining its cold. That's permissible. That kind of atmana. The atmana that's prohibited in the Mishnah and the previous Mishnah is atmana where you're insulating something to retain its heat. And that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, even if it's just going to retain the heat, and that's putting something into a furnace. That's going to be awesome.
Can I ask a question? Because Rick and I were talking about this on Friday, and I'm not clear on it. So I'm sorry, but just like a little review. What does it mean by Hatmana that says this Hatmana is Moisiv Hevel and that Hatmana is not Moisiv Hevel? But they seem to be talking about things that aren't. You wouldn't necessarily think that that's going to be a heat source. It just sounds like how is that determined?
So anything that in itself becomes hot enough to conduct some heat. So it's not talking about that it itself is a heat source in the sense that it's creating heat, its own heat, or rather it's taking the heat from the hot pot and then is itself becoming hot to the degree that it can add to the retention of the heat. We have an electrical engineer here who's visiting us from New York.
And what I got from the Gemara is that anything that's got enough mass and enough moisture that it holds the heat, because that's the one thing that makes heat transference possible. The more mass and the easier the substances the heat transfers. So mass and moisture were the things that they outlawed.
Hey, Betsy.
Sense? So yeah, if something that weighs a lot and has some moisture to it, it'll hold the heat better and actually be a heat source itself. Something that's light and fluffy doesn't do that.
And so my understanding is that it itself starts conducting the heat.
I don't see how that's possible, but that's why I was kind of confused myself, because it can't conduct heat without some kind of power going to it. It just can't. But if it retains the heat better than the food does, then it's returning heat to the food.
Well, so maybe I'm using the word conducting the heat wrong, Bensi, but the idea is that it itself becomes hot enough that it now it can
Transfer
return
the
the
heat
heat.
back to the food. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, sir. Okay, I'll let it go. I don't want to sidetrack us. Sorry.
Perfect. But the idea is that when it has moisture, when it has moisture, or some things, even if they're not moist, they're so dense that they become hot, and therefore will retain the heat more, because they themselves become hot and add to the. They're not only allowing the pot itself to retain its heat, but they themselves become hot enough to make the pot retain its heat more.
What I'm getting from you actually is, I'm just asking a question. I'm not making a statement, but like when the potato becomes gush ham, so it just, there's certain things that like not only absorb the heat, but they give out heat, I guess. Is that kind of like what it is?
That's the idea. That's what I was using conducting heat for that they now become so hot that they can give off. If you touch it, it'll feel hot to you as well. The insulation itself will feel hot. So if you think of styrofoam, it doesn't become. If you think of styrofoam, it doesn't itself become hot, but it retains but it helps what's inside it to retain the heat. We're talking the Chazal. We're talking about things that it itself became hot enough that you can. If you touch that became hot, and then the concern was that you would try and increase the heat in the insulator as opposed to just the pot. And that's where the gzeira is. Because you may try and increase, since the insulation itself would become hot, you will try and increase the insulation's heat. Okay. Taner Rabban. So we're continuing Nun Aleph on Aleph towards the bottom. Taner Rabban and Alpha Picha Amro in Tevin Afil B'Dav Sheina Mosef Hevel. Even though we said you're not allowed to insulate in anything that adds heat. Even if it doesn't add heat, you're not allowed to insulate on Shabbos. If you already insulated before Shabbos and you want to increase the insulation level, you're allowed to. That means you already have a towel wrapped around your pot from before Shabbos, and now you want to throw a blanket over that. You're allowed to. What do you do? If you think that the towel or the sheets are not strong enough to insulate it, you can take that off and put on top of it a coat. Or if it's too much heat, on you're afraid that it's too hot and you want it to not insulate as well, so you're going to take the sheets off and you're going to take the coat off and you're going to put on a sheet. Either way, you're allowed to do that. Rishon Gamliel said similarly, you're only not allowed to insulate on Shabbos, even if it's as Bensi said, a fluffy insulation and not something that's dense and solid and going to increase the heat. That's only that's only if it's in the original pot. But if I had cooked the hot soup and I took it off the stove, I served it, I want to retain the heat because maybe later I'm going to want some soup, and I take it out of the original pot and I pour it into a second pot a second vessel. And so it's in a tureen now. And I want to insulate the tureen to retain the heat as long as we can. That's permissible. But if it's in a secondary vessel, that's going to be permissible, because if you already passed it into a second vessel, which automatically reduces the temperature, for sure, it's going to be, you're not going to start recooking that, because you've already done an action to reduce the temperature. Because you yourself are reducing its heat. Then you're going to go ahead and heat it. The Gemara now is going to go into the muktzah of the insulation, as we were talking about for the past few days. And what happens if you insulate it in something that one layer of muktzah and another layer that's not muktzah? Taman v'kisa b'dava anita b'Shabbos. You insulated it in something that is allowed to be moved on Shabbos. Or taman b'dava she'ein anita b'Shabbos, or you insulated it with something that's not allowed to be moved on Shabbos and covered that v'kisa b'dava anita b'Shabbos, and covered that with something that you are allowed to move on Shabbos. Then you're allowed to take the pot out and put it back in, because you have since I can take out the outer cover, and I could get to the pot, which I can then remove the pot lid, and the insulation that is not allowed to be moved will fall off on its own. However, if I have a cover that is not allowed to be moved, or I insulated it in something that all around that I'm allowed to move on Shabbos, but the cover on top of the insulation is something that I'm not allowed to move on Shabbos, and now I can't get to the pot to remove it because it has a cover that is muktzah, that is not allowed to be moved. So if the outer layer is something that I cannot move, so I can't get to the pot to get the insulation off. The only way that we said in the previous Mishnah that I can get to the pot and remove the insulation that's muktzah is only if I can pick up the pot and it'll fall off on its own. In this case, where the outer layer of insulation is something that is muktzah, I'm not going to be able to do that. And Rashi points out, even though that we see later in the Gemara that I'm allowed to grab the barrel. If I have an opening at the top of my barrel, I put a rock there to seal the barrel, and then I'm going to pick it up, and I'm allowed to pick up the barrel and remove the rock by tilting the barrel, and it falls off, even though that essentially the barrel is supporting this rock. Now, this should be counted as a basis l'davar aser, a support for something that's muktzah. Nevertheless, I'm allowed to do it, as we explained a few days ago, that really it's not a basis, because the rock is servicing the barrel. The barrel is not servicing the rock, and so the barrel is not a support for the rock. The rock is there to seal the barrel, and therefore the barrel is not going to be nullified and as a service to the rock, and so it doesn't count as a regular basis. And if I can't just tilt the barrel for the rock to fall off, I'm allowed to even lift it and tilt it, because if the barrel is between other barrels, I can't just tilt it. I'm allowed to lift the barrel in order to tilt it and get the rock off. Here, I'm not going to be able to do that because I can't get to it, because it's surrounded by a muktzah. So essentially, our Mishnah said, this Brisa is saying this, that as long as I can get to the cover, then even though that it is covered with something that is muktzah, I'm allowed to do it. But if the outer layer is a muktzah, I can't get to it, I'm not going to be able to uncover it. If one corner is open, anywhere is open, so I'm able to pick that up and knock off the muktzah So then I can take it out and put it back in. V'im lav, and if not, eino notel machzer. I have no way to take it and to put it back because it's going to be muktzah. Another halacha, Rabbi Yehuda Eimer, Ura shel pishtan dak arei kazev. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said that only thin flax strands are going to be considered a insulation. That's prohibited because those the thin strands are going to compact well, and that's going to be like zevel, like dung, and be a good insulator. I'm allowed to put whether a metal pot on a metal pot or earthenware pot on an earthenware pot in order for them to heat each other. But not vice versa. I can't put earthenware on metal or metal on earthenware. Because each one, because they act differently, one is going to be a stronger insulator for the other. I also allowed to seal the opening with a dough. And we're not talking about a dough that he kneaded on Shabbos. Obviously, you're not allowed to knead the dough on Shabbos, but they would use dough as a seal on their earthenware vessels to retain the heat. And not that I want the upper one to cook. So if I have a cold pot, I can't put that on a lower pot and seal it because then I'm cooking the upper pot. But if the upper pot is already cooked, so I have a soup on the in a lower pot in an earthenware vessel, and then I have in another pot I have a rice on the upper pot, and the rice is already cooked, and I want to put it on top of the lower pot, and I'm going to insulate them both, but I want to seal the lower pot to the upper pot with a dough. I'm allowed to do that because it's only retaining the heat. It's not actually cooking it. Only to retain the heat. And just as you're not allowed to insulate the hot, you're also not allowed to insulate the cold. To which Rabbi Hitter lahatman asatzayin, to which we go back to what Rabbi said in the name and accepted the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and Shmuel Paskin and the Gemara on Amud Aleph, that you're allowed to insulate cold, and we're not concerned that if you insulate the cold in something that you would insulate the hot, like Ian said about coffee. I have cold coffee, I want to retain it. It's cold, so I'm going to put it in the fridge, or I'm going to put it insulate it in something that's going to retain its cold temperature. And now I want to, but maybe since sometimes you heat coffee, then maybe I'm going to come to cook it. We're not concerned about that, and therefore you're allowed to insulate it on Shabbos. The ein merazkin or meraskin lo yas hasheleg v'lo yas habarad. You're not allowed to grind up or crush with your hands ice or snow or hail on Shabbos. Because you're creating a new state of the snow into water. If you're in Meimav, if you're intending to create water, so you're not allowed to do that because you're creating a water which is considered a nolad. Rashi here says, he's creating a nolad, and it's a form of malacha. It's not just that he's creating a muktzah, but it's a similar to, it's a me'ena malacha that's going to be prohibited. This deals with, may somebody wash their hands in snow on Shabbos. So if you're just stepping or playing in the snow, you're touching the snow. So this is that in and of itself wouldn't be the issue. The issue is if you're washing your hands with it. So you want the water. So that would be a problem of moilid. But you can put it into a cup, whether you have a liquid in the cup or into a bowl. and it melts on its own. There, I'm not doing it. It's going back to its natural state. That's not a concern of mother. So I could take some ice, some hail, some snow, and put it into my cup. It'll cool whatever's in there, or cool the cup, and that's permissible because I'm not creating the noilad. I'm not making something new. It is happening on its own. But if I put my hand in and I crush the snow with the intent of the water, so now it's going to be a muktzah. Yes.
Question real quick. Something that came up this last Shabbos. The non-dairy coffee whitener. It's in the freezer. I need coffee. Can I take it from the freezer, add hot water to it, and then pour it in my coffee when it's frozen on Shabbos?
So adding the hot water to it,
it's
never going to cook it.
It's frozen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not gonna cook it. I
use cliche but yeah.
Sorry.
I use the cliche to add the hot water. So
that is the appropriate thing. And it's not going to cook it. You're not and you're putting in a liquid, so the melting is happening into another liquid, which is going to be fine as well.
Liquid,
like you could take an ice cube and put it into your drink to cool it down. That's also permissible. So that's not going to be a problem. If however, I take out a bit and I want it not to be ice, and so I crush it with my fingers and my hand, that would be melting it in my hand. Not that you'd want to eat it that way, but that would be problematic on Shabbos.
So I wanted to ask. I don't know if you're aware, but there are things called hot plates. Some people make them. Some people buy them. Some people make them. But could you, in all seriousness, could you kind of give us like just a little sketch of pitfalls to avoid in terms of Hatamana in our times, things that we, like you throw a towel over it. I assume that's okay because it's kind of like it's not a solid seal. But what are things that people often do that they shouldn't be doing?
There are, I think most of the things we do today are not real Hatamana. Because we're cooking before Shabbos and we leave it on a blech before Shabbos. You're not taking something off on Shabbos and insulating it. But there's a question about a crock pot that has the higher walls around it. There are different types of slow cookers. Some of them have just a heat source on the bottom. Some have a heat source all on the side, and it goes all the way up to the top of the pot. And then there's a question of whether that's Hatamana or not. And if it's Hatamana, so then you wouldn't be able to put something, leave something there before Shabbos because it's Hatamana in something that actually is a heat source, right? So if that counts as Hatamana, you have to, according to some, put something at the bottom of the hot plate on the inside, between the insert and the heat source, in order to lift the pot. So that air can get through at one side at least, so that even though it continues to cook, but it's not going to be Hatamana, it's not going to be an insulation. That's only insulation before Shabbos is something that's Mosif Hevel. And on Shabbos, it's putting something into a thermos. Would be a Hatamana that would not be permissible.
But just putting something that's cooked and you want to warm it up on Shabbos morning, so you throw it on the blech. That's not
whatever way that's permissible. That's not going to be Hatamana. That's either going to be permissible because it doesn't look like cooking, and it's not or it's going to be prohibited if it's something liquid or something. But that's only going to be a concept of bishul, or mechzikim avashal. It looks like you're cooking or reheating, but that's not going to be an insulation because it's not insulated. It's only on one side. In order for something to be a Hatamana, I'm actually enveloping it in whatever I'm insulating it in. So Hatamana is where I'm enveloping something, and on Shabbos, even if that doesn't add any heat, in the case you were talking about is reheating something on Shabbos. That's a bishul question, a cooking question, and a question of whether this counts as cooking, reheating, or mechzik hamavashel. It looks like cooking. And those have nothing to do with bamatonin, which is talking about insulating. Insulating.
But
would
can you
always,
cover it up with a blanket or you cover it up with a towel or something?
right? That would be insulating, and that would.
But that's okay.
That would not be okay. You cannot fully cover something in order to add or retain its heat. For sure not if it's on a heat source. For sure not. So sometimes, let's say you have a hot water urn and you feel like the water is not hot enough. So you can put a towel on top of it. That's not going to be hatmana. But if you envelop it with a towel, that's going to be hatmana, and it's not going to be permitted. With this, we complete the fourth parak of Shabbos b'matomin. We should come back to you as Hashem is. We're now going to begin the halachas pertaining to what is considered a garment and what is considered an accessory. Accessories are not allowed to be worn on Shabbos outside in a public domain, because that would be considered carrying. And not only are we not allowed to carry on Shabbos in a public domain, but even our animals are obligated in resting. Now, they don't have the obligation. We have the obligation for them to rest on Shabbos. As the Torah says, so that you and your family and your household and your animals will rest. And so the animals are also obligated in the Yanuach. And as such, as something that is considered carrying on Shabbos, if it is not a garment, not a typical thing to wear, but is an accessory or something that is abnormal or different, and as we'll see, some things that we're concerned you may take off on Shabbos and carry in the public domain, those are not allowed to be worn. So the Mishnah is going to tell us a list of things that your animal is not allowed to wear on Shabbos in a public domain because that it would be considered carrying. So, what may an animal wear and what may an animal not wear when they go out? Because what counts as a masoi, as something that is carrying, and what counts as something that is wearing. Yotze hagamol be'afsar. A camel is allowed to go out with a bridle. V'na'aka bechatam. And a na'aka, which is either a female camel or another type of camel, with a nose ring. And the nose rings were used as a form of leading them. The nose ring was the accessory that the reins would go into. Vuluvdakin, beperumbia, and the luvdakin, which are Libyan type of a Libyan horse or a donkey with a bridle bit, vasus bashir, and a horse with a collar. And the truth is, b'chol ba'alei shir yotze mashir, and anything that it typically would wear a collar with the collar. And basically, these were rings that were on the collar, so that the reins connected to the collar. V'nim shachim bashir, and you're allowed to lead it and pull it with its with this ring. Umazin alein, and when making something tahor, so you would spritz on it the red heifer water. That would also go on the with the ring. And the tevila of this ring, if it became tameh, going to the mikveh, taking it to the mikveh, would also be even when it's in its place. I think Gemara is going to talk about all that. So Gemara says, "My na'aka b'chata." What does it mean? A na'aka with a nose ring. Amar Rabba Barachana, na'ak techivrasi bezemama de parzeli. A white na'aka, which is either female or a different type of camel, which is hard to guard, and therefore they add, besides for the bridle, it also has a nose ring in order to retain control of the animal. And it was a metal nose ring. A Libyan donkey, with a metal bridle bit. Levi sent money to the people of Chuza, which were wealthy people, and they did a lot of commerce. And he wanted to buy a Libyan donkey from them, which was very expensive and not easy to get. And they were not interested in sharing that with Levi. So they sent him back and said, "We're not buying that for you. And if you have a problem with your donkey, just feed it more barley, and everything will be good." So he sent them money. They sent him back the money and sent him back in the pouch of the money that they sent back to him. They sent him sari. They sent him some barley. Lameimar, giving him a hint of saying the nigri the chamra sari, that all you have to do is feed your own donkey a little bit of barley, and he'll be strong enough for whatever you need. Like you don't need what we've got. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel machlifin lefnei Rebbe shel zubazu. They would switch in front of Rebbe and ask him, what happens if one of the things that are mentioned, one of the animals mentioned in Mishnah is wearing one of the items mentioned in the Mishnah that are used for another animal? Mahu, what's the halacha? So na'aka ba'afser, the wilder camel with just a bridle. That's not a question. Since you cannot control the animal with that, so it's not actually a garment for the animal. It's just it's just carrying the bridle for you, because it's not going to be controlled that way. So it's just carrying it. The question rather is the other way around. A calm camel, a regular camel, with a nose ring. That's excessive ways of guarding it. It's going to control the animal more, but it's not necessary. Since it's enough with just the basic bridle. So the extra nose ring is, you're carrying it because that's the animal carrying an extra accessory because it doesn't need it. Or we say no. If I'm guarding my animal any extra, that's great. It's not going to be the animal carrying something for me. It's actually increasing the shmira. It's increasing the protection. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi said in the name of his father, 4 animals can walk out with the bridle: a susva, a pered, a gamal v'chamor, a horse, a mule, a camel, and a donkey. What is it excluding? Wouldn't you say it can walk out with a bridle, but not with a nose ring? They're not allowed to wear the nose ring. And that tells us that an extra increased protection is prohibited. What it's saying is, these 4 can carry the afser because it actually controls them. So the bridle is going to be a garment. But in the akka, this wild camel, which will not be controlled by the officer, may not wear it because the bridle is not going to control them, and therefore it's just considered something they're carrying. It's not going to be an actual a garment for them, and it's prohibited. Tomorrow we'll continue with this idea of extra protections on an animal. Is that considered carrying, or is that considered a garment? Because after all, it does protect.